This is really something. Thank you for having us. Thank you for coming. Where to start? My father was a photographer who, how can I say this? He never sought publicity. He felt himself behind the camera and not in front of it. And I was asked yesterday when we came, we came directly from the plane to here, and we saw this wonderful picture of my father that was taken, I think, in about 1948. It may have been a self-portrait. We're still trying to figure that out. But how would he have felt, how do I feel of sharing this? And I feel very proud, humbled, and hard to believe he was, barely 20 when some of these pictures were taken, 21, 22, through Normandy and into Berlin. But how would he have felt? He would be proud as well. And it occurred to me when I was talking to someone yesterday was that, well, the reason he wanted to take pictures was he wanted to show people what he saw. He wanted to tell a story. But he didn't want to be part of the story. So he would acknowledge he would like credit for doing something, but he was not one of those photographers that you see that has their name as big as the stars or the celebrities that they're taking pictures of. He was very quiet, very shy, reserved, and his work was that the way he worked was that he kept in the background and followed a story and became part of the scene without his subjects knowing that he was there. And you can see that in a lot of these pictures. No one really is aware of the camera or the photographer. The other interesting thing, there are many that come to mind, but just the mechanics of taking these pictures. It's not pulling your iPhone out and snapping something and looking at it and trashing it and doing it again, or making multiple copies and editing and photoshopping. He had that little camera, a Contax, black and white, no flash. He had to judge. He had to become a master of lighting, of focusing quickly, taking these pictures, and then who knows when being able to develop them. Because you're on the front line in Normandy, you have a couple of rolls of film stuck in your pocket, and I asked him in our conversation, what did you do? Well, I sent them back, or I traveled back. I got back to London, and I was able to develop it, really without an idea of what was on those rolls of film. So you have all of that in mind, that you're taking pictures, hoping that there's something there. And film was not cheap either. You had to conserve, and it wasn't easy to get supplies to the front line. So there was a whole lot of stuff going on. So when you look at this, I think it's just, I'm humbled. It's remarkable what he was able to do. And, I'm sorry that I didn't appreciate as much of my father then as I do now, because, he's daddy who's telling you what to do. We've got chores on the farm. You got to feed the cows. You got to do well in school. There's all of this going on. So, there are so many things to discuss, but back to the pictures and how this exhibition came about. It was about 2010. My friend at the time, Beverly, Dr. Ortiz, was out on Long Island doing house calls, helping take care of my aging grandmother who lived to about 104, and my mother who later became sick, ill. But she said, your father has all of this stuff upstairs. You have to do something with it. You can't just let it sit there. And being an outsider to the family, she was aware of things that we didn't understand or appreciate, because we're dealing with the day-to-day business of farming and dealing with parents and grandparents that are getting older. But she said, you have to do something. So the start of it was, get a tape recorder, get a digital recorder, and have your father talk about what he did. So I did. I listened to the doctor, and I got my father we got started. And it was very difficult for him to open up and acknowledge his feelings. Another question that came up was, how did this shape his life? The war really shaped his life and a lot of people that I knew as a teenager who had been in World War II but never talked about it. And what my father also explained was that the people who don't talk about it, they saw things that they don't want to remember. There was this PTSD phrase hadn't been around, hadn't been thought of yet, but there was a lot of hurt that was difficult to bring to relive, to talk about. But we did, you know, with the pictures, and he did open up and explain some of it, and you're seeing some of it here now. And I don't know if there's anything that I can answer, or I have to say the credit for all of this goes to Beverly for instigating, pushing me to sit down with my father and start the conversation. And then to Heidelberg, because without the Heidelberg Alumni Association and our connections to House in New York, and Jimmy, who sent the letter from Heidelberg to asking me to join the alumni, that we wouldn't have this wonderful relationship that I think I'm trying to give back a little bit now to the university that was so kind, and I had such a good time back in 1983, 84.
I mean, I have many questions. I worked on Lee Miller and also Brooke White, but I'm going to say Lee Miller because I don't want to say it's the same story, but I think there's a similarity. Her son, Anthony, was also the one who has, or now has, all these photographs, which were also in an attic. So I'm slightly intrigued by the idea, because you've already mentioned that many people come back from the war, and in Ken Burns' PBS show, I think it's a 4-hour show, this was one of the subjects that comes up, the war, the PBS TV show called The War, that after the war, many people simply didn't want to talk about the war anymore for various reasons. And the idea that these photographs end up in attics, and that people after the war say we're not interested in those photographs anymore. I mean, Lee Miller goes so far as to say that she didn't think that it was any valuable work at all. And it's the next generation that looks at them with a certain distance, and then realizes this needs to be brought back into the public. I mean, they were in the public once already when they were published, but they need to be revisited. So I'm intrigued with that. But I want to ask you first, as the outsider, what did you see there? Because it's not your story. I can see where it being your parent, and there are all kinds of complicated things going on with parents and parents with children, but you're looking at it from the outside, and it's probably, and you're not connected to Germany because your mother is German, right?
My mother is
and
German.
He met her I really want you to talk, but I think we need to have this little piece of information.
Another
here.
one of those stories.
And then please, you talk.
My father came to America in 1946, and Life magazine sent him everywhere. They had fun with this British guy, British accent, you know, sending him to a ranch in Texas to photograph cowboys, and they were, you know, and then to Arizona and New Mexico to photograph Indians, you know, Native Americans. But he was in this period, the transition of travel from the propeller plane to the jet plane. And 1956, there was a story Life said.
They did not meet in Germany during the war.
No. They wanted a story on Pan American, this Pan American Airlines, the pilots of Pan Am, the ones who piloted the planes for 20 hours, 24 hours. My mother, born in northern Germany, was 15 at the end of the war, desperate to get out of the country. I mean, and anyway, she applied for a visa. It was 1952 that it came up. She got to New York, worked as an au pair, worked in a bank, but decided she wanted to see the world. So she became a Pan Am stewardess.
They're not called stewardesses anymore. They're called flight attendants.
Stewardesses had to be young, pretty.
The rules have changed.
And unmarried. 1956, the story is Leonard, go and make something of these pilots who are going to be piloting jet planes soon. So that's the story. Go, take pictures of a pilot. Well, my mother, being a Pan Am stewardess, had this route from New York, Rio, Cape Town, Paris. One of the most romantic clipper plane routes there could be. So Leonard is assigned to this, and of course all the pictures are of my mother, who is 22, 23 years old, 24 years old. So
okay,
that's how they met.
Okay, so now back to my story.
So the outsider's perspective.
Exactly.
So as we've discussed, Clark and I met here in 1984 at the Heidelberg Ruder Club. We were both studying here, and then our paths went separate ways because I decided to go to medical school. It was sort of 20 years of torture. But at any rate, my path brought me back to Long Island to start a practice. And so I had known Clark and his family previously. During the course of medical school and finishing college, I had come to the farm just to rest, to escape, because it was stressful and it was the safest place on the planet for me. And can I come study? Can I come do something that doesn't require much thought? So just to clear my mind. So I'd gotten to know his father and his mother and Oma, his grandmother, and his brothers, and felt very happy and comfortable there. But I had a mission. I had to go to medical school and finish. And so I'd come and visit and leave. And so when I finally relocated to Long Island, I'd known them and they were very helpful to me. I started my own practice there. And so they were very supportive and helpful, with just general life things in that difficult transition. And sort of along the course of the way, I'd visit the house and I was taking care of Oma got sick. I came to the house and I see these old Life magazines. And his father sits down and, have some tea. And there were actually times when I had to rest at their house after a long day in surgery because I just couldn't stay awake to drive home. And so I got to know a little bit of these stories. Well, when I was when I took pictures of the leukemia girl in Texas, that was a Life magazine story. And, medicine is hard. And, when I was here and I was there. And, I got these stories, and he was a very good storyteller and very modest. And I finally thought, I got a glimpse at some of these pictures and these images, and I said to Clark, I said, and that's exactly what I said, nobody knows this, and he's going to die. In my business, people die. Right? We all live in denial, but we all die. The first thing, I'm a cancer surgeon, the first thing people say to me, well, am I going to die? And my response is yes. I'm very flip about it. Yes, I'm going to die too. In the meantime, we have work to do. We don't know why we're here and we don't know where we're going. But in the meantime, we have work to do. And meanwhile, Leonard has done so much work. And when he dies, if you don't do something, no one will know. This is history. This is world history. And that's before I saw these pictures. This is world history. He's been a witness to the 20th century. It would be unfair to the future to deny that history. And so you've got to find a way. And at the time, we didn't have electronic records, which I think are the bane of every doctor's existence. But we had little dictaphones. I said, look, this is what I do in my office when I see a patient. I tape the history and the note, and then I send it to a medical transcription service, and they send me a paper record. This is what you should do with your father. At least get it on tape. We can always email it somewhere. But if we don't have his voice describing this story, you've lost a valuable piece of oral history, something that I regretted with my own family. I don't really know my family history. And so you have the opportunity to capture not only your family's history, but world history, and you're going to lose it. And so he listened.
But I'm still interested also in the pictures themselves. What do they tell you? And then also you, but first you, because you're looking, again, I'm suggesting this isn't your history. Yeah. So why is it, and especially these photographs, yeah. Let's focus on these four photographs.
So now he's dead. He died. Unfortunately, I figured that out too. But, So now he's dead, and some time has passed, and the house where the photos have been renovated, and now we're getting married, and so this is the first chance I actually have to look at this collection of boxes of original prints and negatives, huge, vast, enormous. And concurrently, we had met David Gill, the German consul general to New York, through Jimmy and our connection to the Heidelberg alumni. And he asked us, there was a book published immediately after the war of many of these photos, and there was no interest. As you all know, the war was something to put behind us, to forget, to bury away. So no book would bring any interest. So the book fell into the rafters with everything else. And so we exhumed a copy of the book and brought it to David Gill, and he said, these photos are incredible. We'd like you to do an exhibition to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the end of the war at the German consulate. And we agreed, and then the pandemic happened. And that was actually, for us, a blessing, because none of these photos had been viewed. The boxes were unopened. The audio was still intact. It had never been transcribed. The audio files were saved onto a Mac, and the photos were all still in boxes. And the request was do an exhibition, and our internal response was, oh my God, now what? How do we do this? I don't know. And so it began the process of opening up these boxes and realizing what a treasure was in them. It really is a treasure. You open this treasure, and you go from one, and you sit there for hours, and to this still, many of these photos are still in the attic. When we go upstairs, I've compared it to C.S. Lewis and the wardrobe, and you leave the world and you go to Narnia. And when you're in Narnia, time doesn't pass, and you're completely absorbed in another time and place. And every box is another time and place. And whether you're looking at pictures of the Oscars in the 1950s, Harry Truman, the Kennedy inauguration, the Apollo mission, and so much more, you're completely lost and time passes. So having a pandemic is actually pretty useful because there's all this extra time and there's no social distancing and you can sit there for hours all by yourself. And that's basically what we did. And then the challenge was, fortunately, the pandemic postponed the exhibition. So we had 2 years to really sift through so many of these photos and then discuss, debate, disagree over the organization of the photos. And then, well, we can't just throw up a bunch of pictures. We need to put them in context. And that began, my background is in cancer surgery, and to do what I do, we have to do quite a bit of research. And so the academic training, the academic standards kick in, and well, we need original data. We need, rather than scientific data, we need original documents. And as it would have it, we have all of the original documentation, biographical articles about Leonard, his autobiographical paper in Life magazine. And so little by little, I began to, he understood the importance of his work because he preserved it so well. And so this is important, but I'm walking away from it. So he left us this archive. And it was just a matter of opening the books and the magazines and the journals and documenting and culling out the relevant information and matching it to the pictures. So in the process of selecting the photos for that exhibition and this one, it meant going through the original Life magazines, the original Picture Posts, Collier's, Atlantis, anything autobiographical, and discovering so much. And then categorizing and cataloging it, which became a big spreadsheet, which I gave to Anya, which has really become the basis of all of our work. And so all of the quotations, and fortunately, because I understood German and can speak French, it was very helpful to go through these journals and have the original content saved and preserved. And so that's the outsider that, you've got to save this. We have to catalog it. We have to study it. We have to research it. We need to cross-reference it. If someone wants to open up a Life magazine from 1946, they need to know which page. I became a member of the New York Public Library because they have cataloged all of the Life magazine stories. You can't sit and go through every page of a Life magazine. So this way I can search. How do you do a search? So you do your search, you put in your search words, and I'm sure everyone in the room understands that, Leonard McCombe, and then it comes up, and then I have the PDF file, because you need something that digitally you can work with. And so that's what the outsider academic did, to have documented and cross-referenced so that we can assist people in the future. And I see that house becoming a library where people can come and study. So that's the outsider.
I would be interested in hearing also how you look at these photographs now with the distance of 75 years. Because we're just focusing on the post-war photographs here.
First thing I want to say is that it was difficult prior to 2010 or to look at these, difficult physically. There were the boxes of prints, which these are the originals here, which were Marietta, Anya, and all of the team here at Heidelberg requested. These are the original prints that he developed immediately after the war with this book in mind that he was going to publish. And the book fell through, but the prints were there. And then when he came to New York, he tried to do an exhibition, and that didn't really work. So all of these prints were in boxes. But the negatives, I couldn't look at a negative and figure out what the picture was. My father was able to do that. But to look at a negative, black is white and white is black. But until the digital age with a scanner, and you put it on the scanner and then you can see it on the computer screen, I was astounded. Beverly said, get him on a digital recorder and scan the pictures. Well, until we were able to do that, really, we didn't know. My father had a rudimentary catalog system. So, we had an idea of what was in what box, but until you can see it on the computer and do it, and then I started to do an Excel sheet with keywords and follow things. So that was the first difficulty. And then now digging these pictures out, and what do I see is, man, how was he able to do it? Because you have that camera, and you're not only struggling with the camera and you're part of the army. There was this great little, the British Army gave him an ID card that said, if he was to be captured and taken prisoner by the German forces, he was to be treated as a correspondent or as someone in the army with the rank of captain. He was really on the front line, and a lot of those pictures from Normandy, you see the doctor working on wounded soldiers and so on. So many things. What do I see? The pain involved in this period of war. Because if you were in some of those pictures, if you see these wounded soldiers, there were no helicopters to evacuate them. There were no, the rudimentary field hospitals. People were literally in pain. The other thing, part of this exhibition also, and my father talked about it, was not only the suffering of people, but the suffering of animals. The farms in Normandy, dead cows in the meadow. And he said the smell of that, you could never forget. And you don't realize that if you're looking at pictures or seeing things on television. But, him describing that was incredible. The other difficulty, and also in looking at these pictures with him describing the things like food. You're on the front line and advancing, and the supplies don't catch up with you. He said there were days when we were hungry, and we came across a farm, and there were eggs. And he said, I remember my father speaking, I ate a dozen eggs because there were these eggs there, and we had nothing to eat for 2 days prior. So the mechanics of war were different, a whole lot different. And when you look at the English Channel and the Normandy invasion, it's not a big space, but back then it was a huge space. So all of that, I mean, I began to realize, you know, it wasn't that long ago, but it was really an entirely different time. And when you think of today, I mean, the drones and the sort of video game war scenario that is going on, I don't know, it's different, but it just, the feeling of seeing this and putting yourself in a position where you have pain and hunger and suffering that fortunately none of us really probably will never know. It's sobering.
I mean, it's interesting that you use the comparison with Narnia, because of course that is supposed to be a magical world on the other side, a beautiful fairy tale world. But there is something uncanny if we look at these photographs now, partially because they're in black and white, and we are so much, I mean, not us, but many people are not used to seeing black and white anymore. There is something magical about them. It is as though and that's what I mean with the uncanny. It's as magical because they're like time capsules. It's this notion of a moment frozen, but also a historical moment frozen. Magical also because all the horror you're describing right now is something that we have to imagine as we're looking at these photographs. The photographs themselves are very beautiful. They're extremely composed. Because earlier you said he didn't want to turn himself into a subject, but of course his viewpoint, the way he's looking at things, right. He writes himself into, he's the author of these pictures. And the uncanniness that I'm interested in here is that on the one hand, of course, we do sense that he has an incredibly compassionate eye for what Anya had already said, the kind of suffering that comes out of the war, because these are not battle photographs. They're photographs of hospitals, they're photographs of refugees, they're photographs of people on the street after the battle is over. So we're already looking at the kind of collateral damage, or rather they're indications of the collateral damage of the actual battle. It's very hard to photograph battle anyway, because there's so much noise, there's so much dust, there's so much, I mean, this is what many of the war photographers and also filmmakers talk about. So on the one hand, we're asked to enter into this world of horror, but at the same time, because of the formalization, and because of the effort that goes into the formalization, there's also something very beautiful. This is a contrast, or rather a conflict I've always been interested in with war photography, because it seems to me that that these pictures appeal to us on two levels. We're supposed to have compassion. We're supposed to identify with the suffering we're seeing in the pictures, or also the resilience, which is part of what we're also seeing in the pictures. And yet I feel I can't help but also say, but I mean, look at the mise en, the framing. Look at the way he uses color and shadows. So that's something that intrigues me in general with this genre. And if we're now looking at this more than 7 years later, something else comes into play, which you've mentioned. These days, anyone can take photographs with their cell phones. If you look at the photographs that came out of Afghanistan or out of Iraq, many of them were, digital. Far more pictures can be taken. You don't have the whole problem of you have to process the film and you have to print the film. You have to make contact sheets. In the process of all of that, things get destroyed. The famous Kappa photos of D-Day landing, they're all so blurry, and people thought, oh, that's because he was emotionally so excited. No, it's because the technician made a mess of it in the studio in London. So this is written into these pictures as well. The fact that they're not just snapshots the way we think of war photographs now. And at the same time, and I'm intrigued by that, but I don't know whether your father talked about that. The Vietnam War was the war where everyone could go everywhere and photograph anything they wanted to photograph, and it pretty much got printed. After that, the American government became wise that this was not a good idea, and they started what we now call the embedded journalism. World War II is somewhere in between these two, and I'm kind of intrigued with how he was moving with the troops, but he was also, whenever this is post a battle, he was able to go places that the troops were not necessarily. How much, I don't want to call it censorship, but how much constraint was there in what he was photographing?
There was constraint. Before he became part of the British force in Normandy, he was very young. He was not well enough to be part of the army, but he was part of the picture post staff, or he worked on behalf of the government. They wanted stories of positive propaganda, boosting the morale on the home front. So a lot of the 1941, 42 to 44 stories, or all of those stories, were what's going on, and everything was upbeat. There was a pheasant shoot in the north of England, the horse racing, or a dog show, or the Royals, or something. And then there was one story where he was asked to go to the secret headquarters where the British intelligence was deciding what targets to bomb in Germany. This would have been 43, early 44. And blindfolded him at 3 a.m, put him in a Jeep, took him to an undisclosed location, and who is this general, and who is this, and the map on the wall, and the pins, and all of this strategy of what targets to hit in Germany. But the story was published with whatever censorship to keep things secret, but as a piece showing that the British really were winning. Well, in parts of times during the war, they weren't, and so where was I going with this? His stories, that was the beginning of telling a story. That was how he was connected to the British Army. And then once he got into Normandy and beyond, he was there. They assigned a writer, a reporter to him. So they were kind of the first embedded journalists. Not, there wasn't this term, but they moved along and he took pictures, and the reporter sent back stories. They were able to move about behind the lines, and then occasionally they got caught in the crossfire. So he had he had an injury to his ear. He was next to a mortar, one of these big guns that was going, and it went off, and he wasn't aware, and it punctured his eardrum. So he was right there with it. So I don't know if that answer, or am I explaining what you were asking, or?
Well, partially. What I was interested in pointing out is that, because you were saying that this is a very different war from the way we're thinking of wars now. You want to say something to this, or?
I think answer to the question, I think he was able to wander off and take pictures of humanity as part of the storytelling. There's one story, the capture of a Nazi official who worked at Buchenwald. I'm not sure if we have that picture in this story, but we have one. And so if we listen to the audio of this story, he was walking around Berlin just minding his own business, taking pictures. And many photographers were, and there were complete chaos. And so in the middle of the chaos, you have to create some sort of order. And he's walking around, and a British soldier calls him and says, "Bring your camera, we need you. We're going to capture this Nazi." And he had no idea, none of it was planned, but it was a spontaneous thing. And he writes about that. I was just walking around taking pictures, and the soldier said, "Get in the car." And they went to this man's house, and now he was trying to reestablish his life as an attorney, and denied any involvement at all. But I guess, insiders, the informants had seen him, and there's in the picture post-article, there's a picture of him in his Nazi uniform. And as it turns out, they finally got him to confess, and they wanted McCombe to document the whole process. And so that was the mandate. And so he, I think he went out and just took pictures. And then the military pulled him in and said, we need you here. Document this event. And so there's the process of them going, and the story, reads, we went into his house and we were waiting for him inside his house, and he was coming home from work, and he walked to the door and he was surprised by the military. And here are the pictures, and here's a picture of him completely denying of his involvement, and here's a picture of the interrogation, and now he admits that he worked at the Buchenwald camp as a registrar. And then the next picture is of the soldier holding a gun to his head in a car, taking him to wherever he's being taken. And so it's a very dramatic set of pictures. So I think it was a little of his assignments, but his freedom, because he took trains during this time, and these pictures that he took over Warsaw, we have a picture, one of them here, he describes that, it's over here next to the red Poland. So that's a picture where there were not many trains available, and so when you could get on a train, you got on a train. And so it's not really clear the context that led him to the train, but he ended up in Warsaw, and he's walking around Warsaw, and he takes a picture of this lady not wearing shoes, but the shoes are in her backpack because she wants to save the shoe leather. And so he's walking around Warsaw, and someone happens to be flying somewhere in a plane, and, I'll get on the plane with you. So I think a lot of this was, I'm 20-something years old, I'm on an adventure, I'm here to document things, and I'm having a little bit of fun. But this stuff needs to be done. So that, I think that's the story, that, the train rides and trying to get from point A to point B, it was difficult, but he did it. And partly connected to the military, but partly independent, and always with a writer. Let's just go get this story. Well, maybe there's a story here. Let's go here. Let's go there. So I think some of it was spontaneous and independent.
So, it's a mixture really of what you were calling propaganda, and you happen to be at a place at a time, and that also means you have to have the initiative to, again, I'm reading this in relationship to the women I was writing about, Martha Gellhorn, who was very much not embedded. She was a very badly behaved young woman, and she just did what she wanted, and wherever she found someone who had a Jeep, she was like, hey, take me along in your Jeep, because I want to be here, there, and everywhere. And sometimes they took her away. They didn't take her away, but they told her you're not allowed to go there. So my point here being that you have to have this initiative, you have to have this also certain desire or willingness at least to put yourself in danger, because as you both are pointing out, and which we mustn't forget, that where photographers are actually endangered. They do sometimes get killed, and so it's also the risk, I think, that's part of it, the willingness to take the risk. But also you have to have a certain eye, because what you also said at the very beginning, you don't have much time. This isn't like these days when photographers come to photograph you, and it can take hours. Sometimes I tell them, but, if you were on the war front, you wouldn't have these hours to play around with your life. So you have to be able to do things quickly, and you have to see something like the picture you talked about, this one here. You have to have, your eye has to be so focused for you to notice that detail, to take that photograph, because what we are now assuming that he didn't find her and say, okay, young lady, take off your shoes and walk across the street in order for me to photograph you. And here comes another point that I find interesting when we look at these photographs now. This is the post-factual time. It may be propaganda, but because this is digital, not digital film, this is really taken where it was taken. That is to say, these are not manipulated pictures. And I think that's what gives them, especially in our time today, such charm, even if they're framed, even if they're part, meaning, you choose a frame, and whatever is beyond the frame you don't necessarily see. There could, for all we know, be 5 elegant ladies standing on the other side. Nevertheless, this really did happen this way. And I think that gives us a sense of authentication. At the time, it may have been to a certain degree political propaganda. It may also have been this larger desire to just share with people one's experience of the suffering and also the pathos. Let this war have made sense insofar as we won't have any more wars. Not that that ever works, but still. Also, let's show the humanity of some of these people. And you're making these photographs for people. These are already for American publication, right?
I think most of these were, they started British. No, all of this was picture post.
These are still, okay.
All of this was picture post.
No,
this is long before
They were
America.
not for an American audience.
Never, no.
No, this was several things.
I mean, if I can just say why that question is important to me, because of course you have to bear in mind that for the Americans, people on the American continent, this war was far away. And the whole point of photojournalism in relationship to the Second World War in American publications was to make the Americans aware of what was going on and also why they were supposed to, do whatever it was that they were supposed to do in order for the world to go on. If these are primarily for a British audience, of course the British would identify with these ruined cities because London had already been in ruins.
Yes. So what happened, back up a minute, propaganda is my word, and it's a word that I use to describe, but propaganda has a negative connotation. And
well, war effort is positive. Second World War effort is positive on the Allied side.
Well, what happened was,
I think so.
Yeah.
Imagine if there had been no war effort.
This is
and no war where the Allies hadn't invaded Europe.
Right. But I don't think that discussion took place. I mean, it's a discussion we can have now and try to analyze it. But you go back, you listen to my father, and I talk to him. He's 20 years old. He's 19 years old in London. And he likes to take pictures. He's an artist. And you see that however he managed to capture this. He had the gift to do it. And a lot of things, I can mix this all up, but I remember him speaking to my nephew who was interested in photography. This was at the beginning of the digital camera thing. He said, the pictures are fine, but can you sell them? You've got to make a living. So my father came from the Isle of Man, is in London, and he's trying to sell pictures. He's walking around. He's lucky enough to have a camera. He knows what he's doing as far as developing this. So he would go into picture post with an outline of a story and with some pictures, and would they run it? They weren't particularly fond of photographers. They wouldn't give credit. They thought of photographers as craftsmen, someone to take a picture. The real art was in writing, in describing the event, not telling the story through a picture. So he went out with these stories. He was part of the British Army because there weren't many people with cameras who could take pictures, who could develop them, who could provide the documentation. So he had some freedom. And the morality of propaganda, no. He took pictures of everything that was going on. Burying dead soldiers, dead Germans on the side of the road, capturing German troops, the chaplain giving last rites. All of this was all part of the pictures. And I think when it came back to picture post and they decided if they were going to run a story, there might be, if there were locations or secret things that happened to be part of the pictures, that was censored, but there wasn't this effort to propagandize the war, if that makes.
I'm interested in something else, which is to say that if these are for a British audience, you don't actually have to do as much work making them understand the pain and suffering as you do for an American audience. When it comes to the German pictures after the war, for the American audience, then
it wasn't for the American audience. The pictures were taken to wherever he could sell them, and he was selling them at the time to the British publications picture posts and illustrated. And then it was picked up by French, Spanish, Life magazine in America would they'd get copies of picture posts shipped to New York. They'd say, my goodness, these are tremendous photographs. We don't have anything like it. Get the rights, buy those pictures, and publish them in Life. So the audience for these pictures was, yes, the British, the British newspaper, British magazine mainly, but wherever he sent them around to whoever would buy them, because he was trying to make a living, make money. That was his goal at the time.
Do we want to open towards the audience? I
Sure.
think we might do that. So this is now up to you to ask some questions.
Thank you very much for coming here and tell us all these fascinating background stories and showing us the photographs. I have a question about framing. You mentioned framing, but then he took his photographs in the field and then he didn't develop them himself. So did he actually, when he developed the prints, did he frame them? Did he enlarge them? Did he cut out parts? Or these were the pictures he actually took with his little camera?
These are his pictures.
But
there wasn't, he was, you may know better, but he was running from place to place.
But afterwards, I meant.
So
no.
I think some of the stuff was sent back and printed as is. And so we have thousands of negatives.
Because this is even more remarkable.
The framing we did.
The original prints that are here, there are two types. Some of them, like in the first frame here, I don't know if you can all see it, they're a little darker, the color is a little different. And then the second, the two girls, the girl with the bucket, and then on the next one, the cart and the refugees, I think in the boxcar there. Those were prints that I believe he developed back possibly in London, and some of them later in New York, and were put on a hard sort of masonite cardboard that he tried to have an exhibition with some of those. So those are originals that he tried to put this exhibition together with.
Photo editing, yeah. I don't. We have the negatives. So we have the negatives, and the negatives are scanned, and so the audio was a reporting of the negatives because there were so many negatives, and so there are plenty of photos, and pretty much I would say consistently there's no cropping. He had a magical eye. And he reports the story exactly as he sees it. There's only one photo that I can think of, and I believe that's in here, is the German displaced people. That is the actual photo, and there's audio of him describing this photo. In order to publish it as a centerfold in the magazine, they had to manually cut the photo along a line, the seam line of the opening of the photo. So that would be the only editing, and it was just really cut and paste to fit it in the magazine. And he talks about that and says people were critical of this photo because they said that it was impossible to take this photo as presented. And he said that clearly, that is the picture I took. And so I think he was very aware of those potential criticisms, and he took the pictures and reported the pictures. I think that was very important to him. This is what I saw. This is exactly what I saw. So I think not, yeah.
Hello, thank you for this very interesting conversation and for being here and stuff. And it's so amazing to look at the pictures, and I just wonder whether you could expand a bit more on his formal training or his connoisseurship regarding art, because, for example, the third picture that I can see, this group of people almost reminds me of a chiaroscuro painting or a painting of some sort. But below, it appears or reminds me of could be a movie scene, but could also be an Aaron Douglas painting, completely different genre, right? So I would be interested in that because it appears that he knew what he was doing, and whether you could expand on that.
Again, I think not. When I saw the cattle car picture, to me it was a medieval painting. When I looked at the light and his use of the light, I love art history, so you see that this is a work of art, and it could be a nativity scene, some religious medieval nativity scene. Given his background on the Isle of Man, when he's 14 years old, he's too sick to go to school. He was also mocked quite a bit as a child. And so he's casting about for something to do, so he's going to draw and paint. And the painter says, well, you can't paint, you can't draw, get a camera. And then there's another story of him sitting in the doctor's office, because he spent a lot of time in the doctor's office because he was sickly. And that's when he first picked up a Life magazine. And he saw the pictures in the Life magazine, and he says that in one of his autobiographical things, this is something I have to do. And so that was it. There was no formal training, and I seriously doubt that, having left school at age 14, he had any training in art history at all. I mean, he tried his hand at painting, he tried his hand at drawing, but no, I mean, so many of the famous artists that we see from the Renaissance had training. Da Vinci had training. Michelangelo had training. They had mentors. I don't think he did.
The training that he to an extent, or what the training was, in 1939, end of 38, 39, the beginning of the war in England. And England was rounding up Germans who were in the country and sent the internees, the women and children, to the Isle of Man. Port Erin, it's a little village where my father was born and lived, was the site for the women and children. And lo and behold, he has a camera. So the British authorities say, we need to document who is here, take pictures for ID cards. We didn't even know this existed until last October, when we went to the Isle of Man to discuss, they're issuing a stamp, commemorative stamp, and there's a similar exhibition there.
That's 3 days from now.
But we didn't even know this existed. He spoke very little of it. We didn't have those negatives. Turns out those negatives are in the British archives of these ID photos and the documentation of the German internees. So his training was these little portraits, which are amazing, ID card things. And that's where he began to learn how to, you look at the picture of the girl with the bucket back here. It's just framed right. It's just, he had it in his mind. And this is a discussion I've had many times, and one of them was here in Heidelberg in a Mozart class. Did Mozart, is it in there and it just happens? Or does he have a formula for the key, the tempo, what it's, transitioning from one key to another, the mood that it evokes, or is it inside and it just comes out? And in knowing my father, he never talked about any kind of method or formula. It was there. He could see this, and that was the picture to take. And you had to be ready at that moment. So I think that's how it worked.
Okay, just as a little add-on here, you can listen to that story, Leonard McCombe telling about the Life magazine at his doctor's office and also how he acquired his camera. That's the audio on the very first picture. out in the hall. Just, get the QR code. Also, the university has a fabulous website where you can find all the audio that we have here in the exhibition. Okay, I would suggest that we take 2 more questions, and then there is some time to get refreshments, look at the exhibition, and also maybe enter a little more conversation with our 3 panelists here. But let's wrap it up with Hans-Hasso Kersten.
Thank you. You two are great narrators to bring the story and the context to life. That is so important. I have a question. I mean, you said he had some freedom to walk around in the war, but normally he would be with a writer. So maybe the writer defined the story behind the picture. And when he told you the stories, were they the same stories that were published, or, did he have a different feeling about his photographs than the writers who published it?
I know. I think you're probably better answering this than I am. But to give him a little lead, I know we are married, so I'm the boss. But I know that there probably was not much harmony between the writer and the photographer, and this was a problem. Frequently it was, but no. And the problem that Clark alluded to, that the photographer was just a technician and it was the writer creating the story, and I don't believe that he felt that way.
I think the writer would come to a story with a preconceived notion. And a writer has the ability to sort of manipulate that. And there was no way to document whether that was true or not, except when there were photographs. And the photographer, the picture doesn't lie. So I think there was a lot going on, and especially when my father talked about this book that he tried to do with the writer, he just, this guy agrees.
Yeah, thank you. When I first saw the pictures, I was intrigued by the compassion that they exude. Also, in a way, a compassion that, does not distinguish between French, German, Polish victims. But I wonder, the one thing that I've always found, as someone who's not in that business, obviously, or imagine is very difficult, is for a photographer to photograph people who are exceedingly vulnerable, who are dying literally, who are suffering immensely, and at the same time keeping a distance because you're not capable of helping them. So I wonder, did he ever reflect on this particular moral, perhaps moral predicament?
He reflected on it, yes. He was affected by the war. As I understand my family history, his brother was a conscientious objector to World War II and actually did not serve. He rather go to prison than to pick up arms. So there's that background as far as the war pictures. Later subjects affected my father, I'd say the word is profoundly. There were several stories that he did. One was of a boy in Texas that was dying from leukemia, and he said it was horrible because they wanted to do the story of, the advances in medicine, but people, leukemia is a terrible cancer, and waiting for a call from a hospital of a kid who was going to die, and then going down and photographing the family in the last few days, a week or so of this. That got to him. The leukemia girl, this was a young woman who was 21, 22 years old, who was dying, and that story was about Kubler-Ross, the stages of dying, of denial and acceptance, and there's this incredible portrait of her, of this young woman understanding that she's not going to live very long. And another story, profound, was the thalidomide. It was the drug given to women during pregnancy to avoid nausea. And he actually came to, I think some of the testing was done here in Heidelberg, and it resulted in horrific birth defects.
Contergan. Contergan was the trade name in Germany. Contergan.
And it was here in Heidelberg. He actually came to Heidelberg and was taking pictures here. But the pictures of these little children with trying to learn to write with a pencil between their toes and that. And he talked about that because my youngest brother was 3 or 4 at the time, and just thinking that, how it could have easily been him that was, that had this. So the pictures, the stories affected him, and I think the compassion came out in the end, because the other interesting thing that we're lucky is that he saved these magazines. You could, a week or 2 weeks later after the story ran, you can read the letters of people that had written into the magazine of what they saw, what they thought of the stories and how it had affected them.
Great. Well, we could go on for a long time, but let's not forget that Ringvorlesung is also starting tonight, 6:15. For those of you who want to come and hear Leonard speak on World War I and World War II and the aftermath of World War. Thank you so much for bringing Leonard Cohen to the stage a little bit with you, sort of the man behind the picture. Yes. I know you once called him, because he's so young in this picture, the kid with the camera. We are overjoyed to have this exhibition here. Thank you for opening it with us. It's been a long time now. I think we might all need a drink and really look at these pictures.
Just quickly, again, the work that you and the staff and the help, the team that has put this together, and we're really honored. I mean, it's Heidelberg. We have a lot of great memories, and just so receptive and warm, and it's just been a pleasure and fun.